Ευχαριστώ. Αγαπητοί συνάδελφοι, φίλες και φίλοι, καλή εβδομάδα. Καλώς ήρθατε και σε αυτή την διάλεξη. Από ό,τι βλέπω, οι παρόντες είστε πολύ λίγοι, πράγμα το οποίο οφείλω να πω ότι μας απογοητεύει. Έχουμε 2 εξαιρετικούς ομιλητές σήμερα και ενώ έχετε εγγραφεί πενταπλάσιοι κατελάχιστον από αυτούς που είστε παρόντες, μόνο το 1/5 είστε εδώ. Δεν ξέρω αν προτιμάτε το Facebook. Σε κάθε περίπτωση εμείς αρχίζουμε και περιμένουμε να δούμε εάν θα έρθουν και οι υπόλοιποι. Λοιπόν, την διάλεξη θα κάνουν σήμερα η κυρία Μεριλού Bryant Frank και ο κύριος Ken Frank. Μεριλού, Ken, we welcome you once again. Today, in this presentation, you have kindly accepted to make for us, for the Hellenic Union of Mediators and for ΟΠΕΜΕΔ. And it is a great pleasure to have you with us and to share with you all the interesting ideas you will put on the table. So, do you allow me to present you in Greek?
Please, please.
Thank you. Λοιπόν, η Δόκτωρ Μεριλού Bryant Frank είναι πτυχιούχος ψυχολογίας, διαμεσολαβήτρια, εγκεκριμένη από τα δικαστήρια, εκπαιδεύτρια διαμεσολαβητών και ομιλήτρια. Είναι συνιδρύτρια της συμβουλευτικής ομάδας για την Transforming Mediation, που όπως ξέρετε είναι ένα από τα είδη της διαμεσολάβησης, δεν ξέρω αν το ξέρετε, πάντως μας έχει μιλήσει και η κυρία Jane Gunn για αυτό, η οποία μάλιστα εφαρμόζει μόνο αυτό το είδος της διαμεσολάβησης, το κλειδί του οποίου, η ουσία του οποίου είναι, ο στόχος, είναι όχι τόσο η επίτευξη μιας λύσης, αλλά η αλλαγή της νοοτροπίας και της τοποθέτησης της οπτικής γωνίας των ενδιαφερομένων. Λοιπόν, η κυρία Φρανκ έχει ιδρύσει, είναι συνιδρύτρια, όπως είπα, της συμβουλευτικής ομάδας για αυτό το είδος της διαμεσολάβησης. Υπήρξε αντιπρόεδρος ακαδημαϊκών υποθέσεων, πρίτανης, επικεφαλής τμήματος και καθηγήτρια. Είναι μέλος του Ινστιτούτου Ανώτατης Εκπαίδευσης του Πανεπιστημίου της Τζόρτζια και επίκουρος καθηγήτρια στο Κρατικό Πανεπιστήμιο της Middle Georgia, στο Πανεπιστήμιο της Τζόρτζια, στο Πανεπιστήμιο Μέρσερ, στην Σχολή Walter F. Georgia και στο Πανεπιστήμιο Μπρενό. Το κείμενο της «Ο νους ενός ειρηνοποιού, η ψυχολογία της διαμεσολάβησης» με πρόλογο του Kenneth, τον οποίο είχαμε πριν 3 εβδομάδες νομίζω μαζί μας, είναι στη δεύτερη έκδοσή του και μόλις κατατάχθηκε από την αρχή βιβλίου ως ένα από τα καλύτερα βιβλία σχετικά με την επίλυση διαφορών του 2022. Έχει δημοσιεύσει σε εθνικά και διεθνή έντυπα και εγχειρίδια σχετικά με τη δημιουργία ειρήνης, συμπόνιας, εξάλειψης διαταραχών, υπαρξισμού και πολυπολιτισμικότητας. Υπήρξε πρόεδρος της International Academy of Dispute Resolution και πρόεδρος της Ένωσης Γυναικών στην Ανώτατη Εκπαίδευση της Τζόρτζια. Σήμερα είναι μέλος του Διοικητικού Συμβουλίου της International Association of Dispute Resolution, του Διεθνούς Επιστημονικού Επιτελείου Γυναικών, καθώς και διαφόρων διεθνών ερευνητικών οργανισμών και νομικών περιοδικών. Έχει βραβευτεί με το βραβείο διακεκριμένου παρόχου στη συμβουλευτική, καθώς και με επιχορηγήσεις, εθνικά βραβεία ηγεσίας, βραβεία διδασκαλίας, βραβεία ηγεσίας πολυπολιτισμικότητας, βραβεία κοινωνικής υπηρεσίας και το βραβείο επιτεύγματος ζωής του ΦΟΥ. Πολύ πρόσφατα, κλείστε το μικρόφωνο σας παρακαλώ, πολύ πρόσφατα ανακηρύχθηκε επίτιμος διδάκτορας από το Πανεπιστήμιο της Γεωργίας στην Τυφλίδα για το διεθνές έργο της στην επίλυση διαφορών. Ο Δόκτωρ Kenneth Frank είναι και εκείνος διδάκτορ νομικής, μάλλον είναι εκείνος διδάκτορ νομικής από το Πανεπιστήμιο του Κολοράντο και είναι κάτοχος μεταπτυχιακού στην επίλυση διαφορών από το Columbia College. Είναι διευθυντής του προπτυχιακού προγράμματος σπουδών στην επίλυση διαφορών και στις νομικές σπουδές στο Πανεπιστήμιο Μπρονό, Gainesville, Georgia. Έχει λάβει το βραβείο εξέχοντος εισηγητή από το Πανεπιστήμιο Μπρονό, καθώς και το βραβείο Coach της Χρονιάς για το έτος 2005 από την International Academy of Dispute Resolution. Είναι πρόεδρος του Συμβουλίου του International Intercollegiate Mediation Tournament, μέλος του Διοικητικού Συμβουλίου του INADAR και σήμερα αντιπρόεδρος για την εκπαίδευση στη ΣΥΠΑ για αυτή την ομάδα. Υπήρξε εκπαιδευτής σύμβουλος για πολλούς οργανισμούς σε θέματα επίλυσης διαφορών, διαμεσολάβησης και αστικής κοσμιότητας. Πρόσφατα έλαβε τιμητικό διδακτορικό από το Πανεπιστήμιο της Γεωργίας στη Φλίδα της Δημοκρατίας της Γεωργίας για το έργο του στην επίλυση διαφορών. Είναι επίσης συνιδρυτής της συμβουλευτικής ομάδας Transforming Mediation, της οποίας είναι συνιδρύτρια, όπως είπαμε πριν, και η κυρία Φρανκ, και είναι εγγεγραμμένος ως neutral διαμεσολαβητής στην πολιτεία της Γεωργίας των Ηνωμένων Πολιτειών. Για να είμαι ειλικρινής, δεν γνωρίζω κατά ακρίβεια τι θα πει neutral διαμεσολαβητής. Θα ρωτήσουμε τον κύριο Φρανκ σε λίγο. Αυτή λοιπόν είναι η παρουσίαση των ομιλητών μας, οι οποίοι είναι εξαιρετικοί. When presenting both of you, you know, I feel a little bit, you have so many titles, you have done so many things that I do not know whether we will be able to follow you. Hope so.
Well, we are so humbled to be here, and we want to thank you, Catherine, and your Hellenic Union of Mediators for the kind invitation. Mary Lou and I are just very humbled to be here and very grateful to have the opportunity to talk with you today. And we know that this is a series of lectures that you do, and we just feel very honored to be included.
Thank you so much. And I don't know what bio he gave you, and since you gave it in Greek, I'm not certain what it is, but we know this, we are very humbled to be in your presence, and we really appreciate the opportunity because we see Greece as very close to our hearts. We have a number of good friends that are mediators in Greece, and we've been there a couple of times and look forward to, you know, a future of getting a chance to be in your lovely country and get to see the people in Greece that we care about so deeply. So we are so humbled, and thank you so much for this honor today.
We also thank you very much for your presence today and for all the kind words you say about our country. And we will be delighted to have you with us many other times. We hope shortly that all these restrictions will finish and we will be able to travel as before a couple of years. I would like to put a question, if I may. Ken, you said neutral mediator, and I must say that I have not been able to fully understand these words, neutral mediation. Could you please explain to me, to all of us?
I think that the word neutral,
it's a term here in the state.
It's a term here in the state of Georgia. What the state of Georgia in the United States calls the mediators that are approved for handling court annexed mediations, they call us approved neutrals.
Mm-hmm.
It's just the name that they've given to us. There's a whole discussion we can get into about the difference between neutrality and impartiality, but we'll save that for another day.
Yes.
Yeah, the hope is to be neutral, but I think the goal is if we can be impartial,
yeah,
that's the most important.
Yes, possibly, could we explain this term by saying that the neutral mediator is the one which is not selected by the parties, but by the court?
That's true.
That is true.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Πιστεύω ότι καταλάβατε όλοι τι είναι το neutral mediator. Σωστά? Σηκώστε χεράκια.
Σωστά καταλάβαμε.
Λοιπόν, καταλάβατε, εντάξει. Τώρα, το θέμα της διάλεξης σήμερα είναι η διαμεσολάβηση και η ψυχολογία. Ποια είναι η σχέση μεταξύ των δύο δηλαδή και ποιο το όφελος από την συμμετοχή σε έρευνα. Σχετικά με το θέμα, οι ομιλητές θα εστιάσουν στο αποτέλεσμα έρευνας που έγινε για τη διαμεσολάβηση, πώς οι συμμετέχοντες στη διαδικασία της διαμεσολάβησης αξιολόγησαν και αντιλήφθηκαν τη διαμεσολάβηση και πώς ψυχολογικές απόψεις μπορούν να μας βοηθήσουν πιο επιτυχημένα. Πιστεύουμε ότι η κατανόηση της ικανοποίησης των μερών από την εμπειρία τους σχετικά με τον διαμεσολαβητή ή εκ μέρους τους επίλυση της διαφοράς και η στάση τους απέναντι στη διαμεσολάβηση είναι σημαντικές για το μέλλον και το επάγγελμα της διαμεσολάβησης. I have just announced and explained, Marilou and Ken, what is the topic of today's presentation, although the announcement has been already uploaded in the site of the Ministry of Justice, the site of our union, the site of ΟΠΕΜΕΔ, in many pages on Facebook, on LinkedIn, etc. But I wanted to say this orally because, to my opinion, always from the very beginning when I was trained as a mediator many years ago, I understood that psychology is very important to mediation. And without psychology, without knowledge of psychology, and we cannot make a good process of mediation. So thank you again also for the selection of this topic, and the floor is to Marilou. Ladies first, Ken.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Well, what we're going to do is we are going to, if it's all right, share our screen and go through some things. But if you all have any questions, please don't hesitate, because this is a dialogue and we're all learning from each other. So, but we have some things we thought we'd offer for you and some different things to think about, and hopefully it will continue to improve it, mediation for all of us, because we're all in this together.
It certainly is an opportunity, I think, to share some concepts with you and you with us about how we should be doing mediation and what the research that we're beginning to discover is telling us about mediation. So we are both academics, and we are going to spend some time looking at the research that has come up in the past 4 or 5 years around mediation, and we really want to talk about, I think, what that means for the future of mediation. So we're going to spend some time talking about the research, and we have 2 different backgrounds. Mary Lou, as you noted, is a psychologist, and she comes at the at mediation from that psychological standpoint. I have a degree in law, and then of course when I started back into academia and learning more about mediation, I received a master's degree in conflict resolution from Columbia College. So we come at this from a very academic point of view. And Mary Lou's book is very much supported by research, and the Mind of a Peacemaker, if you've not run across it, is in its 2nd edition, and it really is an important I think contribution to the field. So we're going to start with where we want to go today.
And the piece is, and training is so different in psychology than it is in law. And I got a chance to watch that as he went through law school, and we've had a number of friends that have gone through law school, and we've had children go through law school. And what I learned is that in psychology, first of all, my classes, there were 5 people in my doctoral program, and it was a 5-year program, and there were only 5 of us, and so all my classes were very small. which meant they got to give us lots of personal attention. But I had to take a year and a half of advanced statistics and then research methods, in addition to all of the clinical training that I got. So we were trained both as scientists and then as clinicians, because that was our goal. They wanted us to know about psychology in terms of the practice, but also in terms of being a scientist. So that's something I'm always looking at. And I know, as Ken has continued and went on to get a master's degree, that was something he did. So that's a different lens that we're going to offer for you and just talk with you a little bit about that today. So what we thought we would do is bring together what some of the outcome research looks like. And that really is not just looking at what people are doing, although we'll talk some about that, but also in terms of what do the people who are experiencing mediation, what do they think about it? Because it's an interesting group and we don't always ask. We're going to talk about some of the concepts that have been researched a lot in mediation. And I'm going to talk about some that I actually have missed and some things that I needed to look at a little differently, even to find where the research was. And then we'll talk in terms of honesty and trust, and then talk some about emotions and conflict. And hopefully that'll give us some different things for you to think about. So just an overview, we're going to talk about 4 different pieces of outcome research, beginning with Lewis and Umbright, going through what happened in the Maryland judiciary, what the American Bar Association ended up doing in their research, and then talk about some international research that's been done that tied into some of the outcomes that were coming as a result of this other research. So the first piece is the Lewis and Umbright research, and this actually is the oldest research we're going to talk about today. But they were really looking at it, and it came out of the field of restorative justice. And what they found out is that people who were, and by restorative justice, we're talking about individuals who had done something to hurt another party, and then they brought the aggrieved or the injured party in to work with them. So if there was a theft, then the person who had taken something was being in a mediation with the people who actually had the loss and encountered the loss, which is kind of an interesting form of mediation, and you don't see it all the time. But they decided early on to say, what's going on with the parties who've gone through mediation like this?
And Mark Umbright has been involved in this restorative justice, or what he calls victim offender mediation, for many years. And he finally did some research to kind of back up what he was experiencing anecdotally through this process. And this was one of the big takeaways from his research, when he said, look, when the parties get an opportunity to really work with one another and be there together in joint session and talk to one another, the victim and the offender, they really find out why what happened and how they can grow and move beyond that particular incident, so that they don't get stuck in it for the rest of their lives. So he really sort of started the ball rolling on something very interesting, and that is finding out what those who are in mediation are experiencing from mediation. Mediation is a young academic field. It has not been around that long. Mary Lou and I've been involved in it since the late 1980s. And so we've been around it and watched the growth of it in the United States. And Umbright's work was certainly an important step in realizing there were some good foundational research that we could look at. Go ahead.
Go ahead. The first piece we're going to look at is some research that was done out of the state of Maryland and the Maryland judiciary. And it's really interesting research. And Ken's gonna take this one and go more into it in depth. But they decided the judiciary said, listen, we've got different forms of mediation. Different people seem to be doing some different things in mediation. And we need to find out what's working.
Mhm.
We want to understand what people who are going through mediation, what they're really doing. And there's lots of survey research, and there continues to be lots of survey research saying, well, this is what mediators are doing, and that's good information to have. But it's also really interesting, and I know, from a psychological viewpoint, and in working with clients, and then working over 20 years as a mediator, I want to know also what the people who are going through it think. I know what I'm doing, but that doesn't always mean they think that they're getting the same thing out of it that I am. So they really said, we want to find out exactly what they think. And they found several findings, and Ken's going to spend some time talking about it, both the process they used, but also the powerful findings that they got that shook things up in the United States.
So we were very fortunate that the state of Maryland had a nice bunch of money that they could do this research with. So they paired up with Salisbury University and the State Justice Institute and some of the community mediators in the area, and they put a study together that the strength of it is its thoroughness. Probably the limitation of it is that it's not a huge sample. It's 269 cases, which it's enough to make some good recommendations from, but what it calls for is more study to be done in this area, and really include some larger sample sizes. Incidentally, the state of Maryland has moved on from this, and now they've done a study on criminal law and where there are mediators involved in coming up with mediated solutions for misdemeanor cases, for less serious cases in Maryland, and how that plays out over time. So they're continuing to do work, but they've shifted their focus just a little bit. But this study covered 4 counties in Maryland on what they call day of trial ADR programs, where everybody's at the court, and they would send mediators off with the parties and try to see if they could come up with a mediated solution. This is probably one of the most pressure-filled ways to do mediation, because as a mediator, you're just meeting them for the first time. And now you've got this additional layer that they built in of having a trained observer. So what the study did was it surveyed the participants, the people at the table, before and after the ADR session. It surveyed these same participants 3 and 6 months later. It also surveyed the practitioners and talked with the mediators and what they were doing. And what was really significant was that before any of these mediations occurred, Salisbury University had trained a group of observers. And all of this information is in the study, and we have the link to the study on that previous slide, but all this information is in the study, and they trained observers to just sit back and watch what was happening during the ADR sessions, and then code what they were doing. Was this a facilitative comment? Was this a suggestion from the mediator on how to resolve it? Was this a suggestion from the parties? What emotions are they allowing into the room? And all of this coding was done by trained observers, and then they collated all this information. And as a last step, they took a review of the court records 1 year later to see if these 2 parties had to go back to court, or whether or not they were able to come up with a mediated solution that really worked. So that was the setting for this thing. And we want to focus today on a couple of different outcomes from that research. And again, longitudinal studies in mediation are not that common. And that's the really exciting thing about this research, is that they looked at it over time. So we want to look at how the people at the table viewed the use of caucus, whether or not they thought caucus was a good thing, where the mediators split off and go talk with the participants individually. They also wanted to know the effect of how the mediators or the ADR practitioners reflected emotions and what that meant for the mediation process for the participants. And they also wanted to know what kinds of solutions that came from the participants, how that impacted the way they felt about the mediation process. Rather than the mediator telling them what the solution would be, the parties came up with the solution. So let's talk about the analysis of caucus. This was probably the most significant in terms of how we should be viewing mediation. First of all, if the caucus was used extensively, and there is a correlation here, the longer that the parties spent in caucus with the mediator, the more that the parties felt that the mediator controlled the outcome, the more that they felt that the mediator pressured them into solutions, and the more that the participants felt that the mediation process prevented issues from coming out that needed to come out during the mediation. So what you're seeing here is a view by the people at the table that if caucus is used extensively or used a lot, the more that that happens, the less they feel that they had a part of the solution as the participants in the mediation. And we think that is some really interesting research, because it takes a tool that a lot of people commonly use, particularly here in the States, using caucus, and they question its use and its value for the long run. Because if people are walking away from these mediation experiences saying, gosh, we felt pressured into a solution, we felt that the mediator controlled the outcome, we didn't get to talk about what we really wanted to talk about, that's counterproductive to the whole process of mediation. So also in caucus, the more time spent in caucus meant that the participants reported to the researchers that they were not happy with the process, they were not happy with the outcome, and that the issues were not resolved with a fair and implementable outcome. In other words, they came up with a solution that wasn't right. And they felt that by having the parties individually meet in caucus extensively with the mediator, they were coming up with a process that wasn't serving their needs. So in addition to the actual outcome, look at what is happening to how the parties view the entire mediation process. First of all, instead of encouraging them to feel as if they had a voice in the solution, the more time they spent in caucus, it led to a sense of powerlessness by the participants, by the parties at the table. It led to a belief that conflict is negative, and it also made them want to understand the other participant, but they didn't get a chance to, because the mediators were taking them off into caucus and not allowing them to speak openly to one another. And so what you're getting from this is this whole idea that taking everybody into caucus and doing shuttle diplomacy or whatever you want to call caucus is not a good process for the overall view of the participants toward mediation. So the more time that they spend in caucus, it was also associated with a decrease in the participants' consideration of the other person. There was no reconciliation. There was no coming together. There was also a decrease in the belief that you could talk as a participant and make a difference. So this self-efficacy, I can help solve my own problems type of attitude was diminished the more that caucus was used. And there was also a decrease in the sense that the court cares about resolving conflicts before the ADR session. So the bottom line is that you've got this situation where the parties are not getting much out of it. So the last couple of findings around caucus is that the long-term analysis, remember, they surveyed people up to a year later and then checked the court records. The more time that the mediators spent in caucus was positively associated with the likelihood of going back to court. In other words, they didn't really solve the problem. And the percentage of time spent in caucus had no statistically significant impact, either positive or negative, on reaching an agreement. So if you're doing caucus just to try to get to an agreement, this study says it doesn't matter. It doesn't really help. The next factor we wanted to spend a couple of minutes on was how important it is for the ADR practitioner, the mediator, to reflect emotions back to the parties that are at the table. And what this study found is that reflecting emotions allows apologizing and taking responsibility to occur. Okay. It also allows for an increase in self-efficacy, that ability to talk and make a difference we talked about just a minute ago, and an increased sense that the court really does care about these parties and this situation. So this idea of reflecting emotions back and allowing emotion into the room and allowing emotions to be part of what drives the actual mediation is really important, this study discovered. And also asking the parties for potential solutions and checking in with them to see if the solution would work for them was positively associated with the participants listening and understanding each other and controlling the outcome and apologizing and taking responsibility, all the really good things we would like to see happen in a mediation environment. And it was negatively associated with the mediator controlling the outcome or being pressured in solutions or preventing issues from coming out. So in essence, what we're seeing is that there are three specific strategies: not going to caucus, allowing emotion into the room, and letting the parties come up with the solutions. Those are the kinds of things that the study said should be happening if the participants were going to be satisfied with the mediation process. All right, I've said enough, and I'm going to turn it back to Mary Lou for a bit here.
That was such an interesting study that it got everybody upset. So much so that the American Bar Association said, well, I don't know what's going on in Maryland, but we need to do a study of our own. And I just want to say it's real easy for any of us, and I can speak as a psychologist and as a mediator and as a faculty member. I mean, if I ask my students, how did you like that? How do you like this class? How do you think we're doing today? They always tell me, oh, Dr. Frank, we love your class. This class is wonderful. Everything is going great. But if you really want to know what they think, then you read the evaluations at the end of the semester that they write after we're not there anymore. That's what I always look for, because if we ask them, sometimes they tell us what we want to hear. We were at a conference just a week ago, and one of the participants asked me for some of the research, and so I sent it to him because he hadn't been a part of hearing much about it. And he wrote back and he said, oh, but everybody that I work with, they all love what I'm doing, and so this research doesn't have anything to do with me. And I thought, well, it probably does, but if you just rely on what they tell you, you may not be getting the whole story. And so that's what the American Bar Association wanted to find out. They said, we're going to do this on a grand scale. So they hired social psychologists, and we actually have a friend who was on the committee for the American Bar Association. They said, we're going to do a whole study across the United States because what went on in Maryland really bothers us. Because so many of us like to use caucus all the time, we want to find out what people really think. And what they found was the same things that came out in the study in Maryland. And I'm glad Ken took some time going over it, because they set up the parameters that had been used in some of the other studies. And we wanted you to understand how carefully they put it together, because it's important to know we really want to find out what people want. And what they found out in the study in 2017, that people in mediation who are being mediated want to be engaged in setting goals.
Mhm.
They want to feel like they're in charge of the process, even though the attorneys and the mediator that may be involved certainly know exactly what they think needs to happen. If you want to have the parties satisfied, then they need to feel like they're in charge of the process. They want to be together. They don't want to be in caucuses. They came into the mediation thinking they were going to work this issue out with the other person. And even though it may seem easier for the mediator to separate them, that's not what they really want to happen. And this happened in a wide variety of types of mediation. It might happen in a person involved in a dispute with a business or an organization. Most of my mediations were employment, and it happened in employment mediations. People wanted to, even if they were working with, you would think that, you know, companies or organizations wouldn't worry so much if they really were together, but they wanted that opportunity to work together. And if you keep people in caucus the whole time, they never get that opportunity. They found out that it's important to honor and process emotions, that they want to build trust, and they want to be able to at least feel they've had an opportunity to work out things with the other side. And they really liked it when people showed they had an opportunity to build some empathy and compassion and start understanding what was going on with the other side. That made them feel better about the mediation itself. Well, the American Bar Association published that, and a group of individuals by the name of Eric Galton, Leila Love, and Jerry Weiss, they said, this is really interesting research. And we want to understand it not only for the United States, because we need to know what people are doing and then how this research fits in with that. But we also are going to take it international, because we want to know what what mediators all around the world are doing. And maybe we need to start looking at, are we being as effective as we can be? And that's important, because Ken and I both teach mediation courses and mediation programs for different groups, as well as some advanced negotiation classes. And what we found is that people are starting to say, when we start class, we said, what do you know about mediation? And they raise their hands and say, well, you know, my parents went through it, but they didn't like it, and they ended up having to go to court later.
Yeah.
And that really worries us, because we said, we don't want to lose this wonderful tool, because it's taking longer and longer in the States and everywhere else we've worked. We know it's true in Greece as well. To get into the court system, it's taking a longer and longer period of time. And mediation is seen as a way to help people resolve conflicts without having to wait to get into a court system. So we don't want to lose this wonderful tool that can bring people together, but also help them to resolve issues so much quicker. So what they did is that they put out this article in Alternatives, where they posted their research and what they found out about the fact that not just in the United States, but all over the world, people are starting to do more mediations that involve either a predominant amount of time in caucuses or totally in caucuses. And what they looked at several things: what was going on in the study, and I've gone over a lot of that. What's going on now in mediation, how mediators are being trained, because they said maybe the issues we're not giving them enough training
in joint sessions.
In joint sessions.
Yeah.
And then looking at why people might be doing that, and then looking at caucuses versus joint sessions. Maybe there's a lot of pressure going on attorneys to caucus all the time, and what the overall impact is. And the first thing they found is that the same thing that we're starting to find in these other studies is that people are spending more and more time in caucuses, always, usually, or sometimes. And that's a lot. And in joint session, really less than a third of the time. And that is not just in the United States, but in every country that they looked at. That the majority of time being spent in mediations isn't at all what mediation was developed to do. People are being separated to deal with the issues. However, interestingly enough, 95% of mediators were trained here and everywhere on learning how to use dialogue and work with people in a joint session. So they're trained in caucuses, but they're also trained in learning how to work things out with people together. So it's not that mediators don't know how to do it, but for some reason they're choosing not to.
So it's not the training.
It's not the training.
It's not the training, because almost all mediators are reporting that they were trained to use a joint session. And that caucus was, caucus was another tool, but joint session was just as effective, or perhaps a better tool, but now they're not using it. And, part of it comes from this idea that in the law, and I can speak to that because I've been down this road, went to law school, practiced, and then moved into mediation and academia. What we're concerned about as lawyers is that we take the law, we apply it to the facts, and we come up with a conclusion. That's your classic legal analysis. It's very rational, it's very step-oriented, and it's a way of looking at some, and I'm not criticizing that. That's a perfectly good way to look at things. The question is this the best approach to take as a mediator? And do we discount, and I know some attorneys do we discount the role of emotion? Do we discount the role of the parties making suggestions? And if we do, what impact is that having on the way that people view mediation? Both of us heard in the classes that we teach on campus a couple of different stories about, oh yeah, I've been through a mediation, my parents went through a mediation, and it was awful. And that caused both of us to, we come home and talk about it, and what is making it awful, and why is it not working the way that it should have worked? The promise of mediation was to really allow people to work out their differences and come together. And to be able to come together, you have to be together. And we're hearing from mediators who are saying things like, I don't even give the opportunity for the parties to give an opening statement in front of each other. I give my opening statement and I immediately move to caucus.
And it's not that, I don't believe that law plus facts equals a conclusion, because we know it does. But what's really interesting is that maybe they can find a solution that they're both happy with that might be decided differently in a courtroom. But does it really matter if we honor what the parties want?
Exactly.
And what allows them to come together and to continue working together and learn how to resolve their conflict together? And that's what mediation can allow, that maybe just sticking with this particular equation doesn't always provide. So what did Galton, Love, and Weiss find about the choice of caucus and joint session? What they found is that people who were doing caucus or caucus only were really just trying to get through the mediation, get it resolved, and go on to the next case. And I can understand that. If you're busy and you're trying to get a lot of things, this probably goes a lot faster than allowing parties to talk and work things out and come together with their own solution. But when you do allow them to do that, they develop more understanding, they listen to each other, they can even build trust and maintain a relationship if they had one. I think it also allows them to learn some really good things about conflict resolution. I've had a lot of people tell me that in going through a mediation, they say, you know what, I've learned how to resolve issues other than just this one. I kind of learned how to listen to other people, and now I help them to also listen, and we can work out things on our own. And I think that's what it's supposed to do. it can enhance people's satisfaction with what they end up coming up with. They're happy with the solution, and they can actually learn how to relate better with other people. Because what mediation does when it's at its best, when we are at our best, is it helps people to learn to listen to each other better and relate to each other better. And if we know anything right now, that's something we could all probably do a lot better. I know for us, we're always learning, and I think that's true with a lot of other people also. One of the things they found in their research is that a lot of attorneys reported that they're being pressured to use caucuses, pressured by their law firms. Sometimes mediators are being pressured by attorneys who hire them and said, you know, we're not going to choose you if you don't just use caucus all the time, because we know that goes faster and we really want to get to a solution. And that's an interesting thing, isn't it?
Yes, it is. You know, the fact that the clients are telling the professional how to do his or her job is really troublesome. We certainly wouldn't see that in other fields. If you take your car into an auto mechanic, you wouldn't tell them how to fix it, because we defer to the expertise of the professional. And what we're seeing is that mediators are being pushed to mediate in a certain way.
Mm-hmm. And I can understand why you might do that if you want to keep practicing and want to keep things coming in. But there's got to be a way, if we realize that's not really being effective, and in the long run people aren't satisfied, maybe that's not the best choice.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we learned that maybe even caucuses aren't always that effective. And certainly we found that in the Maryland study that Ken reported on. ABA had some findings that indicated maybe caucuses weren't always that effective. Some of the most recent research that came out in 2018 that's on the slide, they found the same thing, that there really wasn't a significant impact on the agreement. There wasn't any increased faith in the mediator, and maybe they didn't even think they could solve the problem, just like they found out in the Maryland study. And certainly this study said the same thing, that caucuses may not be the panacea that they seem to be, because the parties are saying, yes, we're happy, and then they're going away.
Mm-hmm.
And they're not being happy, and they're going to court, which is what we were trying to help prevent them from having to do in the first place.
And the comment that was on the side of that slide, that maybe it's a reflection of our very fractured and polarized society. Perhaps that's part of the explanation too.
It's easier if we keep people apart,
yes,
than it is to have to put them together, because we'll just get it done and move on, and they just cannot ever have to deal with that person again. And there's been a lot of that that's happened in our world today. And I think we all, at a personal level as well as a global level, can see the impact of that. At any rate, the impact of this Galton Love and Weiss research is that we know that mediators and clients can come to a better resolution through direct communication. And all of the studies that we've talked about all indicate that if they can get a chance to work things out together, that they're going to be more satisfied and are going to feel better about the process. When we know that when people are in the same room, they behave differently. That's true of all of us. Mm-hmm. If you have children, you know that, because if you separate them and ask them what happened, they say all sorts of things about what their brother or sister mm-hmm. said to each other. But you put them in the same room together and they mediate that a lot better. They take their comments and they're a lot gentler about them, and they're less accusatory. And that's true with all of us. It's true with children, but we're a lot like that. All of us know that when we're upset with somebody, we probably say things to ourselves or in the car when we're driving, and we complain about them. But when we're with them, we're not going to engage in that kind of behavior, because we know we really want to work it out with them, and yelling and screaming at them probably won't help. We can help people in the process if we make it more collaborative. Not everybody has to leave unhappy. And that's what troubles us most about some of the outcome studies, is that people are leaving mediation, which is a promise for all of us to be able to resolve problems more collaboratively and more peacefully. We don't have to leave unhappy. And that's what Ken was talking about. And we bring it back because we live in a world today that we can't help but turning on the news today, but realize we can do better than what we're doing today. We can do better with each other. We can do together better between groups, between countries, if we can just learn to help people work things out. And I think mediation provides us at least an opportunity to be able to be better people. Well, let's go into some of the other research that I think is going to tie in with some of these outcome studies. This is an interesting piece. Ken mentioned the book I did, and I missed something, and there was a reason I missed it, but I didn't know why I missed it, because I kept looking, doing literature reviews, trying to find out what has been done in the area of honesty in research. I knew for me it was really important, but I didn't understand what was going on in the field, and I always, would always make comments about, I can't find a lot of research that's been done in the area of honesty. Well, it was because I wasn't looking up the right term. If I had looked up lying in mediation, I would have found lots of things being said about people who lie in mediation. Pearson Thompson did a study of this, and they found a couple of things. They found one, that if people were more, they focused in on lying in mediation, and I wish I had seen this study earlier, but I didn't, and it reflected something about me. They said that when people are more competitive, they're more willing to lie. So if you have people in a mediation context that are saying, I really want to beat this other person, and you've got really, attorneys that are saying, I want to do a good job and show them how good I am, and the more competitive they are, they're more willing to not be honest about some of the facts, or about even what they're willing to settle for. And that's somewhat troubling, but it's interesting. And then the second piece they found is that the more empathic people are, the less likely they are to lie. So if people aren't very compassionate, they're more willing to play fast and loose with the facts. They're more willing to lie about things. But interesting, in their study, they found a gender component. They found that women were less competitive in mediations, and so therefore were more truthful. They also found that women were a lot more empathic, and so they were a lot more truthful. And they found that men were both more competitive and less empathic. And so men had a tendency to be less honest in mediations than women were. And I thought, well, that's the reason I didn't even think about looking up lying in mediation when I was doing a literature review, because it reflected my own biased way of viewing the world. I thought, well, I wouldn't think about lying in a mediation. And after 20 years, I just didn't even think that was what I had to be looking for. And it reflected a blind spot for me, that now I know a lot more about how to look up the research in this area. And I think that's important for us to be aware of. There was some other research that said the more self-aware we are, we're less likely to be dishonest. And I think it was some interesting research. It was just done this last year out of Germany. So I think there are a lot of ways that integrity is important in the mediation process, because we want mediation to be viewed as positively as we can. And I think that includes respect, safety, and trust, and doing everything we can in the mediation process to make sure that when people walk out of there, they say, courts may have some problems, and we know that some things happen in courtrooms that we don't like, but mediation isn't guilty of that. And that just adds to what the other outcome studies were saying. The third thing we want to talk on just briefly is the whole piece on emotions. And I think, you know, as a psychologist, I think that there's some things that in the field of psychology that I've learned about emotions that may have something to do with why mediators might even be going into caucus as quickly as they are. Mm-hmm. We know this from many, many studies, and I'm not going to even pretend to start going into all of these now, because I want to give you all a chance to ask some questions if you have any. But from many, many studies, we've learned in the field of mediation, it's critical that if people are feeling emotions, you need to address them. That means you don't say, oh my goodness, people are angry, now we need to split you up. And because when I see people are angry, I say, oh, good, now you're willing to be honest with each other. Now we can work. This is positive. This is a sign we're going to be able to work this out in mediation because you trust each other enough to tell each other how you really feel. And they say, good. So now they start working. And now the real work of mediation comes and they work together. So emotions are important. But I think for some, after doing lots and lots of trainings in over 20 countries, what I found though, and Ken and I have in the work we've done together, is that a lot of people, when they see anger, they think they need to get the people separated because anger is something they don't want to deal with. But what we know in psychology, and I had to learn this too, is that anger isn't something to be afraid of. And I actually started a graduate program once in counseling. And one of the things I had to help people learn is something I had to learn is that you don't want to be afraid of emotions, especially anger, because anger has so many different things underneath it. And if you look at the vulnerable things that anger really tells us, when I see somebody that's angry, I always know this is somebody who's been hurt and they've been deeply hurt. You don't have anger unless you've been hurt. And if you can learn to deal with the hurt and have them tell their story about the hurt, now you've got somebody who the other person will hear. And you see things like nervous, disrespected, lonely, insecure, traumatized, embarrassed. Those are all feelings we can all relate to, aren't they? And when you see somebody who's embarrassed, you're not afraid of that because you know how to deal with embarrassment. We've all been embarrassed. I have too. So anger isn't something we need to be afraid of, but I think in our training of mediators, we need to be better at that because I think that may be a piece of what's causing people to say, let's separate them right away, because that's something that we don't know how to deal with. But if we think about it, we really do. We know that, go ahead.
Well, we know that if we're trying to prevent conflict, avoiding it only increases it in most situations. And we can't just avoid the conflict by shuttling people off into a caucus. We need to be getting people engaged in the process of building trust and working with each other. You know, one of the things that caused me to move into mediation and to look at what I was doing when we would have divorcing couples in court and we would have to go through the adversarial process of making the other side appear worse than they really are and building up our side to look better than they really are. That always caused me some discomfort. And so my very first mediations were in a situation where we paired a mental health professional with a legal professional, and the only mediations we were allowed to handle by the courts were post-decree modifications of divorce decrees. And it was the most fascinating thing. When people walked out of those mediation sessions, they were happy. When they walked out of court after a full-blown divorce case, they were never happy. So it was really an interesting dynamic to see people walk out of a mediation happy when they walked out of court and nobody was really happy. So we've got to be building the trust. We've got to develop an ability to have mediation prevent the worst of what can happen. And you can see on the screen some of the research that's been put together as part of that process. So, you know, we really don't want to see mediation looking like another tool that is forcing people into a mold that they don't want to be in.
And we can do better.
Yeah.
That's why most of us, I think all of the, you know, your wonderful group, I mean, we want to be better. We want to be able to help people overcome their issues. And I think that there's some pieces in the research that may push us to do things just a little bit differently and even get a better outcome. And, you know, certainly the skills that we're talking about and the feedback that we're getting, the skills that are involved in this process have a much broader impact than just mediation. And I'm going to mention one piece of a couple pieces of research. The Coleman Fisher et al. Group that just came out in 2021 out of the American Psychologist was a whole piece on what is involved in a peaceful country and what in the world does one look like. And there are some in the world. And what they found is that these are countries where people listen to each other and they work things out together and they treat each other with respect and kindness. And Zaki's book that just came out in 2019 that I learned about actually from going to a presentation by Galton, Love, and Weiss was that building empathy is really, really important. And those are some of the same skills that the outcome studies were telling us are really important. And Zaki's book is, called The War for Kindness, is full of research on why this can happen. So he happens to be a psychologist. Well, we talked about several things today: what works, what's important in mediation, and what our potential is to make a difference.
Yeah, and we are always trying to gain a deeper understanding of mediation. You know, our collaboration is long. We've been working together for many years, and we came at it from such two different places of origin. You know, coming from the law, I had a certain view of what should be going on in a mediation environment, and Mary Lou, coming out of psychology, had a different orientation to what should be happening in mediation. And I've learned more from her than she has from me, but we have a tremendous respect for the approach that each other has and what we have learned together and grown from, and we're still on that search. And that's why some of these trends are really concerning to us.
And informative.
Yes.
And help us start looking at ourselves. And that's why we offered them to all of you today, because ultimately it's through these little mediations that we're changing families and we're changing communities, and they can even be a broader impact. And getting a chance to work with people like yourselves and in a country that we love so much, really, you know, says we're about something really important, and the world needs this today. If it ever has needed it before, it needs it now. And you are all the answers. So we're going to open it up for questions. Thank you so much for giving us your time and giving us a few minutes to talk about it. Are there any questions? I'm going to stop sharing.
May I? Can I ask?
Yes.
Yes.
Hi.
Hi, my name is Dimitris. First of all, many thanks for your presentation and your thoughts. Very interesting and challenging indeed. So my question is the following. I mean, if we set aside court-mandated mediations and we stay within the ambit of the voluntary mediations, even, I mean, either by mediation agreement or post-dispute mediations, where the parties voluntarily go and choose a mediator and decide to mediate. Why do we have to be bothered in advance with labels such as joint session, separate sessions, how much, but I mean, how much time in joint sessions, how much time in separate caucuses and so on, to the extent that the mediator has the experience of foreseeing the parties' needs based on all circumstances, the profile of the parties, the kind of dispute and so on. Why do we have to bother in advance on how things will go on? This is my question, and ask it this because I believe that on its particular case, based on the pre-mediation meetings, on the preparatory work that the mediator normally does with the parties separately, and the feeling that the mediator has, I believe that a mediator on the day of mediation may freely propose the procedure and remain open to the parties' will and needs on how things will proceed. Thank you.
Dimitris, you are a very wise mediator, I can tell, because after you've gone through the pre-sessions and you get an idea of what's going to be present at the joint session, an experienced mediator will have an idea of how to approach it and how much time should be spent in the joint session. And I don't think that we are advocating for you to have to divide up the session so that you spend a certain amount of time doing this and a certain amount of time doing that. But what we think is important is that we realize that the more time we spend in caucus, when the parties really want to talk to each other, the less satisfied those parties are going to be with the outcome. And so I think what we're advocating is, particularly for mediators who do not have the experience you do and do not have the wisdom, we want to make sure that they are able to recognize the value of bringing emotion into the room, the value of having the parties together, having the parties come up with the ideas for a solution. And you're right, we're not saying that there should be some sort of a preset amount of time that you spend doing each. And I do believe that a well-informed mediator will recognize when a joint session is more productive and will stay with that joint session. I know we talk about, sometimes we do our best work as mediators when we just sit back and let the parties do the work.
Thank you.
I hope that answered your question.
May I ask a supplementary?
Oh, of course.
Well, what is your belief? I mean, you presented to us what is reported, the outcome of those reports. I mean, what is your own practice and idea, belief regarding joint sessions? Or
I'm going to hand this one to Mary Lou because she is very, very committed on her practice.
Well, I always have used more joint session than caucus. There are times when you use caucus and when it's important, but if people are coming to mediation, I've always seen, and like I said, my work has been in employment. Most of my work has been in employment mediation, which you would think might lend itself more to caucuses. But I have used more joint session, and that may come, Dimitris, from my background in psychology, that I believe I've worked a lot. You know, I had training in family therapy and as well as group work, as well as individual. And I found that when people are having problems with each other, it was important for them to have time and help them to learn to work it out. And so that's my background. And I've got to tell you, Dimitri, I did that with our children too. The first time, we have 2 daughters, and the first time they came to me with the problem, they said, she did this and she did that, and what are you going to do? And I said, you 2 got into this together. I wasn't there. I think the 2 of you need to work it out. And that was the last time they ever came to me. And they're both now adults, and I know that they've gotten in arguments, but they never bring me into it because I don't want to be a part of it. I would help them work it out together if they wanted to, but it's their issue. I want to honor that. And I will, if they don't know how to work it out well, which generally they don't in mediation, I'll help them to learn to listen to each other better and to learn to understand where the other person's coming from. Because 9 times out of 10, they have no empathy or compassion for the other side. But once they've heard the story, they always come back and say, well, I didn't know they felt that way. And I didn't know that's how I came across. And they said, but that's how you hurt my feelings. And then they say, well, that's not what I meant. I'm sorry. And all of a sudden something happens. So my practice is I have a tendency to keep people together more. But I have used caucuses, but I use them sparingly when it feels like we've reached some place where I need to talk with both sides. So that's my bias, but I think he's probably used caucuses more because although I think he's a little different now, but his background initially was that that's what you do. And my background initially was, don't you want to bring people together if they're in conflict, that they want to work it out? That's why they're there for. And I help facilitate that. Even when I was dealing with sometimes groups as many as 30 or 40 people in a room, I still kept the group together.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Lavaki wanted to ask a question before.
Yes, please, please. Vicky raised her hand. Thank you.
Άνοιξε το μικρόφωνο σου, Vicky.
Okay. Good evening.
Good
Thank you
evening.
so much for all the nice things that you told us. And Dimitris has covered me because I wanted to ask something similar. I will ask something very simple and practical. When we have 2 very younger people in the same room during a family mediation, how much time do we have to give them to express their feelings? I mean, sometimes it's so difficult to have them in the same room, expressing all the anger they have during the past years. So sometimes we are in a very difficult position to handle with this and leave it. 1 hour, 1.5, just listening, just looking at them fighting, because I have been part of a situation like that, and sometimes I felt awkward. And I was wondering, of course, we had to go to caucus, so maybe the atmosphere was better. So I'm wondering, is the experience, we just leave the persons express themselves and go with the flow? I don't know.
Vicky, that's a really good question. And I think that gets at the whole piece of how to deal with it. And I do think that's a piece of training sometimes and learning. And for me, it was a process of learning. If all we're doing is letting them express anger, that's not productive. But what I will do is I'll say, what we're going to do is something different, because you all know how to argue. And I'm so glad you know how to do that, because we're not going to have to work in here how to help you express your emotions. But what we are going to have to do is have you learn how to listen. So what I'm going to have you do is give them both pieces of paper and say, I want you to each write down the top 3 things that really have hurt you the most. Not why you're angry with them, but what has hurt you. And then we're going to have you each talk about those. You're going to pick one. Let's take the first one. And if they say, well, I've only got 2, I say, well, that's all right. We can do 2. And then say, what is that? tell me the story of what happened when your feelings were hurt. And not yelling, not screaming, just, I want to hear your story. And then I turn to the other one and say, what did you just hear? I know what I heard. What did you hear? And they'll always say, well, they said this, and that's not what I experienced. I said, but I don't want to hear what you experienced. I want to hear what you just heard. Well, they felt like I really embarrassed them and I didn't value them. And that's not true. I said, I just want to hear what you heard. And what does that feel when you hear it now? For me, it's slowing down the process and not letting them just vent emotions, because they've practiced that. They're good at that. They got an A on that. But what we want them to do now with us, because we know how to help deal with this, is say, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to get what's behind that, because that's what you came in here for. You didn't come in here to have me listen to you argue, because I can find TV programs that do that. But what we want now is I want to help make this productive. And we're going to work on this together. And sometimes when a person says, well, I don't know how it makes me feel, I say, well, let me tell you how I felt. I heard, whether it's what you experienced or not, I heard how hurt they were. Did you hear that too? Well, yeah, I did hear that. I said, how do you feel when somebody feels hurt? Well, I don't like it. I said, you know what? I don't like it either. I've been hurt before. Have you? Yeah, and you need to know what they did to me. I said, we're going to get to that. And then I take them back, but I become very involved in the dialogue, taking them back and forth. And I want you to know it doesn't take long. Now they know how to listen. And now all of a sudden it's within 2 or 3 times they're talking with each other and they're saying, and when you did this hurt my feelings. And then they say, but that's not what I meant. And
discreetly to lead them, discreetly.
Does that help, Vicky? Does that help?
Yes, helped a lot, because I understand that very discreetly, as we has been trained to do. We have to lead the parties to reveal the real causes and work with them.
Exactly.
So to solve them finally, because this is our job. It's not only to listen. Thank you so much.
Oh, and you know, it's so hard because for most of us, anger is a trigger, isn't it? Yes. We see anger and we say, I really don't want to get involved in that.
And it's a trap for us. It's a trap for us, the mediator.
It's a trap. Yes, it is.
Because the parties are very angry, especially in family law. They are very, very angry. Yes. Most of the times. With the children, they remember every fight they had of the past years, and all the things we are listening situations like that.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, Vicky, you're absolutely right. And I think I told you I started out doing family therapy. I got training in family therapy, so I had a lot of experience with angry families. I know what they look like, but they didn't come in just to get me to watch them, because they know what it looks like. Exactly. And they know what it ends like. And so I say, you know, and I always frame it positively. I see the anger and I say, I'm so glad you're in touch with your feelings, because that way they're not afraid of it. And they know I'm not afraid of it either. I mean, I've walked into situations that were very, very volatile. Now, you can't tell this because of where we're sitting, but I'm not real tall. My husband is almost a foot taller than I am. But thank goodness on Zoom, you don't even notice that. But I've walked into situations where I clearly, you know, they could take me out and it wouldn't take much at all. But it's knowing that what we bring and what you bring as a mediator, and as especially someone with lots of experience, is that you know how to help them. You know that there's stuff underneath all that anger. Mm-hmm. And your job is to help get to the story, because the stories touch our hearts, don't they? I don't know about you, but I listen to the story and there I am. I'm right there. When they're chatting and the anger up here, I don't get that. I don't know what's happening. But as soon as I help them get deeper and I say, so what we're going to focus on, you may just have to focus on 3. We can meet more, but let's just start with 2 or 3. And let's start with tell me one story that captures how hurt you've been. And then I want you to tell me what happened. Not in a blaming way, but what happened to you, what you felt. And you help them, and sometimes you have to keep focusing. And then once they get to that story, I want you to know the other side is right there. And they're like, that's not what I meant. Now they're doing the work. And we don't have to do the work. They're going to do the work for us. But we are there to help them slow down and get underneath that. I hope that was helpful. Other questions?
Well, we again are so humbled to have been asked and to get to participate, and you have some contact information for us on the last slide if you would want to get a hold of us and talk to us more. And Catherine, we hope we can get back to Greece soon and come and visit with you and our other colleagues in Greece, because we miss the people and we miss being together.
I hope that I will be shortly in a position to invite both of you.
Oh, thank you. That's very dear.
That would be lovely.
I mean it. And if there are no other questions, and if you have some more time for us, I would like to put some questions or say a small story about what. So first, I would like to say that expressing anger, I fully agree that it is a very good way for venting. And when anger goes away, then the persons can see clearly or more clearly what they want, what they have done, whether they are the other party is the only responsible, or whether they have some responsibility and have participated to the creation of this bad situation. This is one point I wanted to say, to express my agreement, my full agreement with what you said. The other is a very small, short story of a colleague who was invited to participate to mediation, not as a mediator, but as a lawyer, a legal representative of the party. The parties were two businessmen, one from Athens, one from Thessaloniki, let's say. This is not important. And the mediation took place in Paris. So they went there, and at the first interruption, or after the first joint session, more precisely, one of the parties said to our colleague, who I know, "Oh, the other guy is not so bad. I thought that he was awful. But frankly, and I want to say this only to you, he's not so bad." Because it was the first time, not only they had the opportunity to speak to each other, but the first time they had the opportunity to see each other. And last, I would like to tell you as an information, general information about Greek legislation, because it is somehow in relation with what we are talking about. In 2019, there is a law which was published, according to which, in most of the cases, to speak practically, it is provided that the parties must go to a first mandatory meeting. During this first mandatory meeting, what they are requested to do is to listen to the mediator explaining what is mediation, what are the basic rules, and let them speak shortly, but as clearly as they can regarding the dispute. The aim of the legislator is to lead the parties to full mediation. This does not happen all the time, but okay, we have noticed that it is more and more frequent. So this is, to my opinion, I think something which is close to what you said about joint session.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. It's amazing. And isn't it, Catherine, thank you so much for sharing that. And as Ken said, we would be delighted to get to see you and get to see the, you know, all the lovely people that are a part of this group and our friends and mediation community in Greece. But it's amazing, isn't it, how the potential mediation has to bring people together and to see beyond. And each time we bring any of those people together, they are different in their world. They are different in their families and their communities, because they've seen, oh, I can work something out with somebody. And I worry that maybe our world today, and this is my biased view, that maybe we've allowed too many conflicts go unresolved. And that's why people feel so separate and so, you know, are not connecting and appreciating each other the way maybe we could.
I fully agree with you. So are there any other questions, Sergio?
No, I don't see anything.
Okay. So we will thank you once more from our heart
Thank you so much. Thank
for
you.
having this interesting presentation. We look very much forward to seeing you again in Greece, and definitely we will keep in touch.
Oh,
Good.
Be well and keep safe.
Yes,
Please.
you too. Stay
Thank
well.
peace be with you, dear friends.
Thank you very much again. All the best.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.